Well, we're going to start the webinar. Hello, everybody. Good morning to those of you who are connected from North America, Latin America, East Asia, and South Asia. And good afternoon to our friends here in Europe and Africa and the Near East. Welcome. Welcome to you all, and thank you for being with us today. My name is Susana Di Trollio. I work for the Kircher Network here in Europe, and it will be my pleasure for me to moderate in this webinar today. This webinar, the title is The Challenges of the COVID Era for the Jesuit Higher Education. This global webinar is organized by the International Association of Jesuit University, AJGU, in collaboration with its 6 regional associations, AJCU in North America, AUSHAL in Latin America and the Caribbean, the Kircher Network in Europe and the Near East, AJCU Asia Pacific, AJCU Africa and Madagascar, GJASIA in South Asia. This inaugural conference of this is the inaugural conference of the new project of the AJGU on best practice in Jesuit higher education. On behalf of my colleagues of the International Committee that is coordinating the project, especially Ignacio Garrido, who is with us today, we want to thank all of the panelists for accepting the invitation to speak to us today. I would like to thank the president of ITESO, the Jesuit University in Guadalajara, Mexico, Father Luis Arriaga, for allowing us to use the ITESO Zoom platform, and for the excellent technical support that the ITESO's team is giving us today. Our special thanks to Anilda Cordova and Leonora Lizarra, who are backstage managing the platform. For several months now, the disruption caused by the coronavirus pandemic has posed significant challenges for all areas of our Jesuit higher education institution, from teaching and learning, on-campus events, and community service activities to the day-to-day management. In this webinar, we will focus on discuss these challenges, and especially how this crisis has affected the teaching and learning process in Jesuit University and College and their pursuit of an integral education. We have gathered an extraordinary panel of experts on Jesuit higher education and on e-learning from around the world. We will listen to the panelists, and at the end of the conference, we will have a question and answer section. So we invite you all to send your questions during the webinar through the Q&A chat at the bottom of your screens. Please do not wait until the end of the webinar to post your question. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker. For the introduction, we will have Father Michael Garanzini and Father Philip Geister. Father Garanzini is the Secretary for Higher Education of the Society of Jesus. When he began this job 8 years ago, he was also the president of Loyola University, Chicago, which he led for 12 years. 3 years ago, Father Garanzini and the representatives of the 6 Regional Association of Jesuit Universities founded the AJU Association. This is a network that Father Garanzini will lead until next year, when Father Joseph Christie from India will take over. This year, Father Garanzini is also the president of the AJCU of North America. Professor Dr. Father Philip Geister is the president of the Kircher Network, which is the new association of Jesuit university and faculties in Europe and the Near East. Father Geister is one of the founders of this new network. He is also the founding president of the Newman Institute in Uppsala, Sweden, an institution that he has been leading since 2001. Father Geister holds a PhD in theology from Uppsala University in Sweden, and he also teaches systematic theology at the Newman Institute. So without further presentation, it is my pleasure to give you Father Garanzini. Thank you, Father, for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susana. I want to thank you, Susana, too, for putting this together. It's an exciting new venture, and I'm really pleased that it's gotten off to such a good start. And I'm pleased really to express our appreciation, the International Association, to you, to your team, to Ignacio, who's helped you, and also to ITESO for all of their help in launching this endeavor. So thank you all very, very much for this. Let's get right into this. I won't talk very long because I would think our panelists are really very experienced people who really understand are thinking about what's been happening to us since we've entered this COVID-19 era. Like all educational institutions around the world, Jesuit institutions very quickly pivoted to an online format when they had to send their students home. And like all the institutions around the world that have been able to do this, we've learned quite a bit about what COVID-19 is teaching us about delivering education in an online format. So now we know that it's possible for us to deliver everything that we want to deliver to our students. So that's been a real benefit. And I think like most of you, if not all of you, you have been to many, many meetings online. You've had many, many encounters online, and you realize there are many things we can do without leaving our homes or without leaving our classrooms or our offices. So there's some real benefits, and I think people will talk on our panel, will talk about the benefits and we'll hear about them. And I think we shouldn't sell that short. But there's also been some challenges with this. For example, I suspect we'll hear about the limits of online education. First of all, the physical limits when people do not have access. So that's a real issue. There is a divide, a gap between those with resources to online education and those without. And so we're seeing some both benefits, but we're also seeing some real drawbacks when those resources are not present. And the gap between those well off and those that are not well off has really hampered those without access to education. And that's something we're going to have to think about. The situation, COVID has also shown us that we're threatened financially. Many students have taken some time off. Many students cannot afford to continue right now. As we've stretched into yet another academic year, we see that some people just don't have the ability to continue their education, and some institutions therefore are financially strapped. In some parts of the world, we've seen the authorities, civil authorities, that don't like the liberal education we're offering, where there is freedom of speech and freedom of expression and exchange of thoughts and ideas and criticism. We've seen these regimes kind of use the situation to crack down on institutions. So we have to watch that. There are several places around the world where the Jesuits have reported and the administrations have reported that there's some real challenges with local authority. I think what I see at this point is the greatest impact may be on our mental health. Being isolated, being unable to engage with your fellow students or your fellow faculty, between administration and faculty, it's really taking a toll. It's really, it really is quite grueling and quite difficult for some people to handle this much actual separation from colleagues and the constant toll, especially where the COVID has impacted the economy, and the economy is now impacting the family. People are really becoming, in some places, quite desperate. Food insecurity, the ability to pay rent and keep up with your bills is really causing a lot of strain on people. And I think it's contributing to more mental health problems. On the other hand, another side effect is I've seen this now with not just the Jesuit organizations, but other academic institutions and other academic associations. There's more interest in collaborating as resources are stretched I see more people want to do things together, more institutions, more faculty want to do things together, because there's sparked a lot of creative energy and a lot of creative interest in new ways of delivering education, in new ways where institutions could be collaborating. I think we'll hear about someone I'm sure will mention the fact that we could be sharing courses very easily because everybody's online. And so if we just figure out the mechanism to do that, we could be sharing a lot more of what we have across institutions. Because of this, I would expect a leadership turnover. I meet with a group of presidents, about 20 of them, every other Friday for just a debrief. It's really more like therapy for these presidents and rectors. They can complain. They could let their guard down the way they could not do that with their own officers, their own fellow administrators, because they're the leaders. And I've seen that many of them are getting very tired. And I've talked with a few association presidents who have said that they've seen a lot of people talking about retiring faculty, retiring leaders of institutions, because this has been a really long slug, a long haul to get through. Now that there's light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine, we'll see if these things change. But there's one thing I want to end with that I think is the most critical issue and the thing we should all be thinking about most. And that is how to help our students understand this experience and giving them the necessary narrative, the necessary mental equipment to think about what's happening in their lives and what this COVID situation has taught us about our world. What I mean is this is the most impactful experience of those students that we are teaching now in our universities and that will be coming in the next 4, 5, 6 years, 7 years, perhaps even more, even longer than that. As the most impactful experience, we have to help them, I think, and perhaps learn from them first, but then help them shape the narrative of what this means about their outlook on the world and what to expect. The COVID situation has taught us how interconnected our world is. It's taught us quite a bit about how it has disproportionately affected the poor and the marginalized. It's taught us quite a bit about our interdependencies internationally. And if our job as Jesuit institutions is to create global citizens with the common good in mind as their marching orders, help make a better world for everybody, not just the elites and not just those that are financially secure, etc. If that's our job, we have to help them shape this narrative, because for many of them, they're going through it. But by the time they get to university, they need to have in their minds an articulated rationale for what they went through and a vision for the future. And I think that's our real challenge now as this is proceeding, as the COVID situation is still with us, but especially as it unfolds and as we leave the COVID situation and discover what is the new normal for our world. So I want to leave you with that, these 5 reflections, and then this key idea, I think, that we need to think about shaping the narrative and shaping their consciousness about their role in the future. So thank you, and Susanna, I'll pass this on back to you.
Thank you, Father Garanzini. Philip, now is your turn. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Susanna, and thank you very much, Michael. Am I on camera now? Yes, now it works. Yes, I also just want to extend my my thank you, but also my welcome for the seminar on behalf of the Kirche Network. And as you've understood by now, the Kirche Network is the network of Jesuit higher education in Europe and Near East. It's pretty young still. It was founded 2 years ago when IAJU was founded officially in Bilbao. At this point, we are comprising about 30 institutions stretching all over Europe, from Braga in Portugal to Moscow from the north in Uppsala, where I'm located, down to Beirut in Lebanon. Very diverse, a mixture of universities and schools of theology and philosophy, and different institutions located at secular universities. I would just briefly like to say a few words about this project where this seminar is, which is seminar is starting. So the initiative of best practices in Jesuit higher education. The idea, since we have all these networks now and so many institutions that are connected to it, so the idea is to use our networks more to learn from each other. So experiences made and knowledge gained in one part of the world can help to improve our practice and research in other parts of the world. And I think that's particularly true during this global pandemic, because we share the same experiences and we can learn so much from each other. We want to facilitate with this project the exchange of best practices and discuss how we better can live our mission as Jesuit institutions of higher education. And this is not only true about pedagogical exchange, but ideally it could also create a learning community comprising faculty and staff. So the first two topics that the project will address are pedagogical innovation and Ignatian pedagogy, which of course is so critical for the future of Jesuit higher education, and which is such a central part of the mission of all of our institutions. So this project is organized by the Kirche Network, but it wants to engage all member institutions of IAJU. So we'll be more to come. So check for follow-ups and please help us to fulfill this mission. So let me also say just a few personal words about this COVID-19 situations. I still think, and as Michael always described, I haven't come beyond this point, that it seems very difficult still to see something positive with the situation we've ended up in. And even less in regard to what Jesuit education is about. Encounter, exposure to new challenges with different people, sharing with each other, about learning communities. And the social distancing that has come with COVID is causing really the opposite for ourselves and for students and faculty and staff. It creates loneliness, it creates mental unhealth. It reduces learning to knowledge transfer, which I think is one of the really big challenges to Jesuit education. And it makes exposure to other people a potential risk to life and health. So we are supposed not to encounter each other. So at the first glance, it is a difficult challenge to try to find something positive, to find consolation, thinking of COVID-19 and its effects on Jesuit pedagogy and of higher education at large. But then, dipping perhaps a little bit deeper, on the other hand, I think or at least one point of Jesuit education is to learn how to cope with seemingly hopeless situations, or rather to regard situations that we experience as challenging, difficult, or even hopeless, not as defeat, but as a call from God. And today's webinar will explore this question. How can we regard COVID not only as a threat, but as an invitation for change, as an invitation to discover things that we haven't seen before, and also, as Michael already indicated, how can what we experience now change the way how we approach the future? So how can we find consolation in a situation that right now, at least for me, causes so much desolation? And let me also just add a personal thought and an insight that often strikes me in these times of Zoom, that I have thought of very much during the times of Zoom. I guess that one of the remaining memories of the times of COVID will be that we had to look at ourselves all the time on the screen. First of all, where we most of the time are presented in a very unflattering way. We are alone, distant from each other, and having to look at ourselves as we are. This is, for me at least, a horrible experience, but I think it reminds in some way of the spiritual exercises. The camera that films us may be a small symbol for the willingness to look at ourselves as we are doing in the spiritual exercises. And the spiritual exercises teach us about our humanity in a deeper and in a different way than a formal education ever can do. So the isolation that comes with COVID, the experience of being exposed and threatened, offers, I think, from an Ignatian perspective, also a privileged perspective for learning. Of course, I mean, there are a lot of caveats, but I think it might be worth to look at that opportunity also. For some, at least, the COVID-induced isolation offers a relative abundance of time, which is a prerequisite for serious studies. And in the same way, as time in the spiritual exercises is a prerequisite for serious something positive in all of this. COVID-19 can teach us to overcome the problems that information technology has caused in form of enormous distraction, while at the same time liberating the opportunities of this technology to deepen our learning and to help us growing together even over geographical distance. So this is a little personal thought in the beginning, and I am just very much looking forward to seminars as it will help us to shed some light on all these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Now we're going to listen to our four panelists. The first panelist is Father Mark Bosco. He's the Vice President for Mission and Ministry at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., where he leads a diverse interfaith campus ministry team and offers faculty seminars on Ignatian pedagogy and the Jesuit heritage of the university. He also teaches in the Department of English and Theology at Georgetown University. And Father Bosco is also the co-producer and co-director of the award-winning documentary film on the writer Flannery O'Connor, which will be the national broadcaster in the United States on the PBS series American Master in the early next year. So Father Bosco, thank you for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susanna, and Father Philip and Father Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and to share a few thoughts. I think the first thing I would want to say is kind of going off what Father Philip said, just the experience of having to move our educational project online and into a virtual mode. It's I think I was talking to some of my Jesuit brothers, and we thought that at least from May to March to May, we thought there was a bit of an adventure to it, right? How do we translate our courses into some kind of pedagogical, paradigms for this? And I think the word today we would say is endurance and fatigue. Our students are telling us that we're talking about it as faculty, that we're fatigued. And so we really, it's kind of a prayer for enduring this moment, even with the light at the end of the tunnel with vaccines. But I do feel the strain that Father Philip and both Father Mike have suggested in their opening remarks. I think one of the things about the pandemic is that, at least in the United States, and especially in the political capital of the United States, where Georgetown is, it was not only just a pandemic, but there were other cultural things going on too. We had an election going on all through our fall semester. We have the experience of the murder of African-American men, especially, but also women in the Black Lives Matter movement, kind of engaged during a pandemic. So trying to grapple with questions of social justice and the common good in the midst of a pandemic, having to deal with an election in the midst of a pandemic, also kind of weighed on us perhaps in a more profound way in Georgetown, but I think throughout the entire United States. I think that most of what I've had, I guess the hardest thing to endure was that there are 28, if you count Canada, there's 28 universities in North America, or even maybe 29, but they all had a different response on how they could create this semester. So some schools were, everybody was back and they were doing virtual learning, but they were living on campus with some kind of formative moments. Others, like my own university, Georgetown, it was all virtual, and we only had basically the most vulnerable students, about 490 students, most vulnerable students who really could not have a stable home or stable Wi-Fi to do this. And so we brought them. And so managing the expectations of both our faculty and our students, who said, well, look what's going on at another Jesuit school where my sister is, or look what's going on at this part. And that sense of always having to manage expectations with comparisons, and then managing the expectations of what is an A, what is a good grade, what's an average grade, trying to figure out ways in which to give more leeway, more a sense of the texture to this moment in life. So that was kind of, that's from my own experience of just how it's been difficult and a kind of endurance. I have to say that given the fact that there looks like there's vaccines on the horizon, it at least gives us a light at the end of the tunnel. And the weight of the burden seems to be a little bit less, even though my university is still going to be all virtual in the spring with just maybe the senior class, about 1,000 students to 1,500 students tops out of 10,000 undergrads. What were the tasks then of the last 8 months that I feel were really important to Jesuit education? We immediately thought, how do we match and integrate instructional continuity with spiritual continuity or formational continuity? Is there a way to move just from here's your courses, here's the production of knowledge, to how do we keep connected? How do we make those gestures? And so spiritual continuity kind of became a word that we used constantly over the last 8 months. What did that mean? It meant, first of all, getting our liturgies, our worship services streamed on Facebook and YouTube. It meant that we would have the Sunday liturgy that students and alumni and faculty could zoom into. It meant that our rabbi, which Georgetown has a very rich interfaith community of chaplains and centers of intellectual engagement. Between Muslim Christians, between Jewish civilization. We have a Dharmic community. So they began to stream and do on YouTube their own kinds of worship services. So I think that was the first thing we tried to do within the first week. And it really actually had a great impact. We had, for our Easter ceremony in our chapel, there were only 10 people in the church, but we had 26,000 alumni and faculty and students watching it, because we could kind of keep track, as you know, on these virtual platforms. So there was something that it was a connection. It was a way to reach out. So that, I think, was one of the most important things we did quickly. I'd say that the task was to spend some time with Zoom chats outside of the classroom. So I teach 2 classes, and I think I've spent as much time out of the hour and a half or the 2-hour seminar moment and little 20-minute, 30-minute kinds of things with students who I just wanted to make sure that they were okay, or that they could set up a time and talk to me, or talk to staff, or talk to other faculty. So creating those other spaces in the world, the virtual world, I think was a way for us to try to stay connected. I mentioned the vulnerable students, creating places, as Father Garanzini said, about just wellness and health. There is a real burden, and especially if you don't have the means to have a large place to live, a stable place, a place that is, you could really work. And so that's been a real question of how do we take care of those students who are really at the margins of our schools and put them at the center. many different ways to do it. We brought, like I said, some students back on campus. We also had perhaps student affairs folks in our schools reach out to certain school students that were around the world. We even said to our international students over the spring, you know, it might be hard for you to get back in the country because of COVID. So do you want to find a place to live, or we can offer you some space here on campus so that you don't have to leave the country to come back and do that. So that's been something too. And then finally, two other last things I would say in terms of tasks is we tried to start doing virtual retreats. And these retreats would be like, for students, they would be like a weekend of maybe 2 hours with break, 2 hours with break on a Friday, 2 hours with break on a Saturday. But it was really done by our juniors and seniors who would be freshmen and sophomore. And the idea is that the juniors and seniors could say, listen, you're part of the university, you're part of the school. Here's a way to kind of set your moral compass in the midst of COVID. This is what we're going to have for you when you come back to campus. And so those virtual retreats, I have to admit, maybe it was my kind of Jesuit training, I was a bit of a skeptic that was going to work online. But I have to say that I've gotten really good feedback from students, especially, who said, you know what, I've never been on campus because of COVID as a freshman, but I've made 9 friends on this retreat virtually, and I can't wait to meet them. So that was one thing. And the other thing is about what we do with faculty is we try to do a 1-hour examen. And we did it with faculty and staff at different units and departments. And we called it basically an examen on the human face in the time of Zoom. And we talked about the fact, and we led this examen as we see so many faces on Zoom, and we see them kind of abstracted from bodies, abstracted from context and locations. And so we just thought about, how is the face also an image of God? And so this 1-hour examen really talked about what does the face of God look like, and how can we prepare ourselves to do that? And I have to say again, I think it's been well received. It's just a way really to connect with our faculty and staff, to remind them that they're at a Jesuit institution that really is trying to engage at that deeper level. Finally, we talked about pedagogy, and you've mentioned that how do we talk? And so best practices kinds of Zooms between faculty have been occurring all 8 months with some of the centers that we run here. What are the best practices for Ignatian pedagogy? How do you do reflection? How do you talk about context? How do you talk about what kind of action you can take? How do you think about yourself serving the common good? The last thing I would say is kind of what we would keep. What are the pluses of this experience? And I would say, first of all, we're going to keep virtual office hours with students and faculty. Virtual office hours really works well. So that's definitely staying on the books. I think the other thing is this idea of collaboration, though. I've been part of, Georgetown has run a collaborative conference, a seminar with Oxford's Campion Hall. We've run it with the Vatican, with Cardinal Turkson's office congregation. And so what would have taken a lot of time and effort to bring Cardinal Turkson here, or for us to go to Oxford for a day-long seminar, we could actually accomplish through these webinars. And so I think the webinar, it's not going to take the place of conferences and being in front of people, but I do think it will, I do think that this is another way that we will connect, especially when we don't have a lot of funding, to be honest with you. What was so great about some of these webinars is it really the cost of travel, the cost of those things, we could kind of make sure that we were financially taking care of ourselves there. And then finally, I would say that I think I've been talking to a lot of faculty, and the idea of a hybrid within a regular course where you meet, there might be 2 asynchronous lectures that you Zoom record in a semester, or what I found when I was teaching online with students, and that because of the time, and I could see that the kids were kind of like fatiguing out, I would stop the lecture and say, you know what, I'm going to put the rest of this record this online. Please watch this before the next class. And so there was a real sense that it gave us a few more strategies to engage our students. So I think most of all, I would finish by just saying, I have found that students, whether they're in need or whether they have, they do have a great care already taking care of them, there's a stoic resilience to them. One of my students even said, they were reading about stoicism in a philosophy class here at Georgetown online, and they said, that's me. They said, I'm a stoic right now. I'm going to get through this. I'm just going to go straight through it. And so I do think I've been edified by the fact that, these are 18 to 22-year-olds, even our graduate students, who are basically, they understand that there's an end game to this, and they can get through it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you what we've been trying to do here at Georgetown. And I think it resonates certainly probably with a few more of our North American schools. So thank you.
Thank you, Father Bosco. Now I would like to introduce you as Dr. Stella Porter, who is the leading specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C. She is leading an initiative that is helping a school and university in Latin America and the Caribbean to use e-learning and move their courses online. Dr. Porter holds a PhD in computer science and a master in distant education from University of Maryland, which also was the director of the Master of Distant Education and E-Learning Master. Dr. Porter is a friend of us. She actually is a graduated from the Pontifical University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, so she is part of our Global Nation community. Stella, thank you for accepting this invitation, and the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Susanna. Let me just make sure that you can see my screen. Is that all right?
Stella.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your invitation. Yes, I was telling a friend yesterday, I come from a long story with Jesuits. Actually, my entire education, higher ed education, has been done in the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio. But what I'm bringing today to this conversation is actually a mix of my background that I developed here in the US when I came in the year 2000, that I joined University of Maryland University College, which is now University of Maryland Global Campus. And I was there for 13 years. And I kind of, during that experience, transformed myself into a person that e-learning is my life. And actually, this is the experience that brought me to the bank. In the bank, I work in the knowledge area, delivering online learning. So the event this year, excuse me, the event this year that is being told until now as this impact, and kind of very sad for many people to be moving to online education. I come from a view of someone who was in online education, doing online education, but online education did not mean that people couldn't see anybody. So it's a little bit sad to sometimes online education in this moment being seen as, well, if I'm in the online, I can't see anybody anywhere else in my life. And I hope that when we get through this, what will remain is a view of the potential of online education, and not that online means this, that you can't be with your family and you can't meet people for coffee. So my perspective here today is to try to actually discuss something that has been in the minds of many of the institutions working in online learning, which now is kind of placed at the shores, or was already in the shores of many institutions, and that this year became suddenly urgent. And I would compare, this is my next slide, I would compare that a lot of what I'm going to say today already existed sort of in the backdrop for some institutions. And then this year it transformed itself, not into like a tide that was coming, but into a tsunami of an urgent change, and we have to do something. And the need for these abrupt changes without enough preparation is what actually has made this so difficult. And as I started thinking about the conversation today, I went back to something that was talked about in distance education for a long time. And it was this, what we have called, and sometimes in the literature, the iron triangle. And the iron triangle is actually this tension that exists between access, quality, and cost. And for many institutions doing distance education for all their lives, this has always been sort of at the forefront of all the decisions, of strategic decisions, of decisions big and small, even in terms of policies at a state level, as well as institutional level and departmental level. And it's this tension that, since online education has always been considered as a way to provide access to those who didn't have access to normal, traditional face-to-face education, there was a tension there. Okay, so how do I do that with quality and with affordable, affordable cost? Right? And we saw that there was this tension that if I gave access to so many, that might have an effect on quality. I would reduce quality. We're talking about lots of students. And this might also, how do I then maintain quality and at the same time I make this affordable? So this tension, and if those who want to read about this from the writings some decades back, Sir John Daniels was one that used to mention this tension there. What I find interesting is that in the early years of online education, technology was seen as this disruption, that this disruption would come in and kind of solve the problem of this equilibrium of this triangle. And it did in many ways when we had MOOCs being created and other innovations that were based in technology. We saw that, okay, here's something that technology is bringing to us and can actually make this work better. Okay, we can keep quality. We're learning about new pedagogies and how to give good quality education to more people at an affordable cost. The fact was that we were always dealing with an audience that was choosing that kind of education, or at least going to that kind of education because it was an answer to a specific need. A specific need, well, I either for convenience or I can't be in a traditional realm, so this is an answer for me. And as time passed, we saw that technology becoming so part of our society, a lot of the pedagogy that was discussed in online learning became part of what many of the traditional institutions were doing. So institutions started having maybe their small programs in online learning, and they have, they had this whole universe. We weren't faced with what happened this year, which was this entire new audience who did not choose. They were not the non-traditional student. They were that student that maybe wanted the face-to-face experience, and faculty who also valued and wanted to have the face-to-face experience, suddenly faced with having to do that, and there is no way out. So it's a very different situation, which I think is limited in time. I don't foresee ourselves being in this situation forever, but this disruption that happened this year, I want to be an optimist, will bring certain things in as we move forward with even the traditional modes. One of the projects that we advanced this year in the bank, because of our experience with online learning, was a big project called Moving Online, where we just focused on helping people do exactly that, move online. And what we learned is that this disruption, as the word crises represents growth, this disruption has also made many of those who are in the traditional mode of learning the face-to-face question their modes. It doesn't mean that because they were face-to-face, they were doing something that was of higher quality. All that tension always existed. So my discussion here is that this triangle now is present for everyone that wants to look forward in terms of the role and the impact of technology in teaching. And I do think that as society moves forward and digital technologies are part of society, there is also an obligation of taking this crises and moving forward with a sense that how can I find a role for technology in a way that I find a balance? And that's why I've been calling this conversation a balancing act of access, quality, and cost. It is always going to be a tension. And the paradox I have found as I start thinking of this is that technology has become so much part of society that in the first look at the triangle, you believe that technology is going to be an answer to the balance of the triangle, but suddenly we become so dependent on technology that actually these sides could be looked at: the access to technology, the quality of technology, and the cost of technology. And we're back to the same tension that we had before. So instead of technology being a disruptive that is going to help us balance the triangle, we are now dependent. And I don't see really a way out of that because automation is part of our world. So there isn't this way, well, I don't want to be part of that, because we even need to prepare students to be part of a world where technology is there, that this tension needs to be considered at all times. And it is a balancing act that doesn't have one single answer for one single institution. It is going to depend on student needs and what it means to have quality and where you stand in the world. So this is one triangle that I think is going to be very, very present. The other triangle that I didn't have in mind when I actually wrote about Iron Triangle in 2012 and talking how we could use technology to disrupt the tension, I started thinking of the focus of the Jesuit education. And I suddenly found myself looking at this other triangle that is also has a lot of tension, and that in this initiative that we had with moving online, I heard many, many people talking about, and I heard here from the previous presenters, this tension of what do we want to talk about in our learning experiences? Do we want to really prepare students to come out of the gate and be ready to work? Or maybe no, maybe we need some space for them to give some steps back. And we need to talk about empathy. Empathy became such a word. I mean, in everything we did this year with institutions in moving online, we always heard people, we need empathy, empathy with students, empathy with faculty, with their own difficulty in learning and being vulnerable in face of the use of technology. So I saw these three elements around learning that, and I see a tension there because education is needed for so many things that we that develop curriculum and that what we focus within the classroom in our decisions as administrators, what is our focus? And so how to make this equilibrium of actually preparing people for the real world, that they're ready with skills, 21st century skills. At the same time, they have space in their lives for personal growth. And at the same time, we saw this, with the comments about the election this year, the importance of critical thinking, of dealing with so much information, of filtering information. Those things are not related necessarily to the topic of, I don't know, history 101 or biology 301, but it needs to be there. So I think moving forward, these two triangles for me really encapsulate some decisions related to these tensions that educational institutions, all of them, face in preparing students for the world, being part of this world, connected to what's happening, and also using this, what happened this year, moving forward and to increasing opportunity, increasing access with quality education.
Thank you, Stella, for being with us today and for your excellent presentation. Now, from Latin America, we will listen to Professor Silvia Smerker. She is the academic provost of the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. Prior to that, she chaired the governing board of the Mexico National Institute for Evaluation of Education. Also, she was the head of the Research Institute for Development of Education at the Iberoamericana University. Professor Smerker holds a master in educational research and development, and she has an honorary PhD from the University of Autónoma de Baja California, an honorary Doctor of Law from Concordia University in Canada. She chaired the governing board of the Center for Educational Research and Innovation of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Sylvia, thank you for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this very, very interesting seminar. I would like to talk about the theme of this webinar, the challenges for the future of Jesuit higher education from the view of Iberoamericana University in Mexico City.
Sylvia, excuse me, please. Could you please turn your screen wide so we can?
I can't, because the option of configuration is no longer visible.
Okay. Okay.
I can't do that. Can you see it anyway? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay. So the Iberoamericana University, before the pandemic, when the pandemic started, we had already been transforming our undergraduate programs in order to better respond to our changing contexts, to our educational philosophy, and to the apostolic preferences. And some of these changes, I think, are particularly important for the post-pandemic era. The first was to transversalize three main themes, some of which are sustainability, which I think now is more important than ever, interculturality, which this global experience is helping us develop, and gender equality, because we do have a very severe problem with gender equality in our context and within our university also. Another change was an interdisciplinary approach to the four common socio-humanistic subjects that are compulsory for all students at the undergraduate level. And now the approach is to have a problem that is looked upon from the different disciplines. Also a trajectory or a track of social commitment of the students with groups in vulnerable conditions throughout the 4 years of their undergraduate studies, beginning with information about inequality and about social problems, and then a first contact in the 3rd or the 4th semester, which leads to indignation about inequalities and injustice. Indignation pedagogy was already mentioned. Also the commitment from the 4th semester to the 5th, or the 5th to the 8th semester, with closures in each of the semester, and at the end, a reflection on the implications in personal life planning of what this contact with vulnerable populations gave the students. We also had been working on the design of problem-based study programs, both undergraduate and graduate programs, with an interdisciplinary approach. Here we were using as basic inspiration a 3-year-old Center on Transdisciplinary Studies for Sustainability, which we already have at the university. And we developed proposals for programs that lead with inequality, looked at from different disciplinary perspectives, migration, peace building, governance and democracy, and territorial studies with an emphasis on certain territories that are particularly conflict-ridden in Mexico. What are we thinking of with regard to the future in the area of the formation of students? Well, Ibero was not strong as many of our universities on remote teaching and learning, but it did have the infrastructure that allowed us to migrate to remote operation in 1 week when the lockdown was imposed on us. And in this process, we discovered two things. We discovered what we can do remotely, what we can do through technology, but we also discovered what we are missing without face-to-face contact. So we think that one of the things that we can learn is that we can continue to rely on blended learning with things that have to do primarily with acquiring knowledge. We can strengthen internalization, as many of you have already said, and diversification with technologies. Our aim for the next semester is that every subject has at least one session with a foreign professor or with someone external to the university from marginalized areas also. But we need to prioritize what we do face-to-face in order to ensure socially mediated learning, which is something that we have really missed, dialogue, reflection, discussion, decisions that are taken after a dialogue, which have to be present in all of our courses. Of course, hands-on learning, what we have missed in laboratories and workshops. And I think above all, our practices and our social commitment activities, which have had to be carried out remotely, but as we know, it is never the same. It is never the same for the student, it is never the same for the vulnerable groups with whom we relate. And also we have to diversify and multiply group activities in extracurricular areas such as sport, art, recreation, spirituality, of course, and facilitate those that are proposed by the students. We have to listen to the students. They have wonderful proposals that do not occur to us as faculty, and we have to listen to them all the time to be able to facilitate those things that they think they need and that are being proposed by them. We also have to continue to diversify our student population and to begin to diversify our faculty, which is something that we have not done. And when I speak about diversifying, I'm talking about including different socioeconomic origins, ethnic origins, special needs, foreigners, in order to represent the diversity in the Mexican population within the university. I think this is something that's very important. Regarding research, 3 weeks after lockdown, Ibero made a call for research and action research projects on the effects of the pandemic. And this was made possible because there was already a very strong relationship with groups in vulnerable conditions. So we received 62 proposals for research or action research projects. 35 of these were accepted with an investment of $450,000 US by Ibero University. And the projects had to do with all aspects of pandemic effects, with health, with education, with nutrition, with employment, with action research involved small-scale entrepreneurship, and also information. We had a project that does monthly surveys on the effects of the pandemic on economic, social, and health areas of the population. And this has been very important because actually there's no one else in Mexico that is doing follow-up studies on what the effects of the pandemic are. Also, during the last few years, Ibero has been increasing its research capacity. It has 150 faculty that are national researchers, nominated as such by the federal authorities. And we had already been prioritizing interdisciplinary research and research that has potential for social transformation and for problem solution. And this will have to, we think, be strengthened in the future. We are also developing conceptual frameworks to begin discussions on the convenience of prioritizing in the future open science to make knowledge and information available, and participatory action research that involves intervention projects that transform reality. There are changes in the National Research Project policy in Mexico that are punishing private universities. Someone spoke about this question of having the government against what our universities are doing. So a new challenge is both to generate and to raise more resources on our own for doing research. And then of course we have our outreach program, which is strong in our case. through its continuing education program, in its relationship with small and social enterprises and capacity building, in dealing with problems that affect the vulnerable, like such as violence, migration, disappearances, which we have a lot of, unfortunately, in Mexico, human rights violations, and indigenous rights, and in working together with social and popular organizations in their struggles against injustices in general. So this is very strong in our university. And these not only have to continue, they have to be strengthened, they have to grow. And the biggest challenge I think that we have in front of us is to relate all of these outreach activities, to relate them much more to the other two areas of formation and research, because they tend to work on their own. And in summing up, I would just say that Ignatian philosophy, we think, calls on us to respond to contextual realities, seeking social transformation for justice and peace. The reality was already unequal, unjust, violating of human rights. And we have been trying to respond with knowledge generation, committed action, and some solutions. But the pandemic has made all of these worse, and it will have lasting effects on poverty, on unemployment, and also on violence, we believe. And so we think that we are called on to respond, walking with the poor, and to contribute to the transformation of the unjust structures of society, even more so today and in the foreseeable future. Also, discernment as a personal and an institutional strategy, both in formation and dynamically, to better respond to the needs of our immediate environment and beyond our immediate environment. Also, the MAGIs, the constant improvement to revise our structures and organizations and eliminate barriers to ensure social impact, because in this transition, we have discovered a lot of structural barriers within our own organizations, especially in dealing with interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary projects. And prioritizing the human person, the cura personalis, to allow for an integral development. And of course, this also has to do with the socio-emotional problems that have risen as a consequence of the pandemic. And this applies to our students, but it also applies to our personnel, to those with whom and for whom we work. And finally, I think for the future, higher education institutions will be different. In the post-pandemic era, we will see the beginning of their transformation. I think that Jesuit universities have to be a part of this collective transformation of higher education institutions in general and of education as a whole. We have to learn from others also, but we think that higher education, the Jesuit higher education institutions can bring their charisma to bear on the profound renewal that higher education and education in general is going to have in the near future. Technology, of course, will reign, as has been said already, but it will need to be complemented with human relationships. Institutions will take advantage of technology and education will become more international. And this will, I think, have an impact on global understanding and collaboration, and we have to sort of orient the use of technology towards that. A more profound commitment to the ever clearer need for social transformation and for sustainable ways of production and consumption will be a clear social demand, and as universities, we have to respond to that. The need to transition towards interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity will challenge the structures of our universities. We have seen it live in our own university. And all this will happen in the context of economic limitations that will probably follow the pandemic for at least a decade and will challenge, of course, our priorities. So those are the reflections that I wanted to share this morning with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for your presentation. Now I have the pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Javier No. He is the Dean of the School of Social Sciences and Humanities at the Loyola Andalucía University here in Spain. Before working at the Loyola Andalucía University, he was the Vice President for Academic Affairs and also the Dean of the School of Communication at the Pontifical University of Salamanca in Spain. He holds a PhD in educational technology as well as master's degree in computing science. Dr. No has been a full professor of educational technology and e-learning for almost 30 years. So Javier, thank you so much for being with us today, and the floor is yours. Javier, please turn your microphone on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm trying to share my screen. So, good morning for South and North American people. Good afternoon for European people. And hello, everybody. I don't know the time in Asia. I highly appreciate the invitation. Thank you for this opportunity. I think the previous reflections are enough to discuss for long hours, but I'm going to present some other thoughts, perhaps more theoretical than Silvia does just now. Challenges since COVID-19 pandemic began are a lot, are numerous. So I try only to focus on the field that I'm a little more closer to, teaching and learning environments and their challenge. First, the pandemic has raised some issues in higher education that were already under discussion. Say the last 5 or 10 years, reports like Horizon Report or the community of Shaping Edu, and a lot more think tanks had advancing emerging trends in higher education. That were already threatening higher education, things like unbundling or micro-credentials. We were speaking about blockchain, that kind of things, mainly in structural or business trends. And some other trends are related to education, some to business, some other to campus concept or to learning environments. I'm not going to talk, let me, the second. I'm not going to talk about a campus concept, but it is changing and it's going to change more and more in the next years, you know. But since we are speaking about possible change in pedagogy, innovation trends, and new uses of technology, I have to say that the boundaries between everyday life and learning are continuously blurring. And pandemic has highlighted it. So, new spaces for interaction require new strategies or new approaches, I think. How those trends impact our way of doing pedagogy? Here we have 4 well-known Jesuita education or Ignatian pedagogy models. The 4C model of Jesuit education, the Ignatian pedagogy paradigm, the Ledesma-Kolvenbach model in some higher education institution, or even some core characteristics of the Ignatian spirituality that are, I think, are always in the way we think in education. How this new situation, COVID-19, deal with those models or the way we think about education or pedagogy in Jesuit institutions. So as we are expert in other approaches, I am thinking more in the way that technologies are shaping a new learning space, a new space for interaction where the Ignatian way will be facilitated or the opposite. I'm not thinking in e-learning or online learning. Stella Porto knows about this a lot more than me. I'm thinking in expanding the space where the interactions will take part from now forward. So regarding to innovation technologies and disruptions, what is keeping us from, well, excuse me, what is keeping us, what is getting us apart from Ignatian pedagogy in new normal, and what is helping us? We can analyze it through each of the models above, but I choose one of them. It's just one proposal to face the issue. So we have to say we have new spaces for intervention. And during the COVID, we have enhanced the means we use to interact, and we have catalyzed what in tech ed has been called a new generation digital learning environment. This is from the writings of Malcolm Brown in 2015 to today, but the jump from 2015 has been enormous, mainly the last year. Today, the new digital environments surround all of our activity in higher education. And this includes artificial intelligence, second generation of social networks, analytics, adaptive technologies, machine learning, and a lot more, with their risk and with their advantages. So what I propose is to analyze each one of our characteristics is keeping us or is helping us. So for instance, let's think about filters young people are using to communicate. I was going to include here a picture where I am a child or where I am a woman in streaming when I were speaking with my daughter. Suddenly, she applied a filter and I changed my face and my personality. Perhaps we are too aware of the risks. It's not only because of improved technology due to the pandemic usage, but also to advances in artificial intelligence. I have to say, perhaps all this new generation digital learning environment is a matter of distance and representation. Distance has been broken 150 years ago. So we can see what we don't see, we can hear the past, we can hear the distance, in the distance, like we can see and hear in that moment, and broken the means of the measure of our senses is a challenge to education in that environment in the future. In the other side, the new environment facilitates inclusion, universal design, access, that I want to speak about, promoting consciousness of the diversity to our students. So analyze which part is heavier, which part, left part or right part, which variables are we can include in the right part or the left part of this categorization. I think will be a nice exercise we can do in universities next months and years. We have been forced with blended learning in a hurry, but for sure we will be able to use it better and better. But in the meanwhile, I have a reflection. If lots of teachers hardly knew how to evaluate their students during pandemic times, last academic year without any student reproof, at least in Spain. I wonder if it could be because lectures replicate the didactic method that students recognize. On the other side, those are examples, no more than little examples, not only through obvious technologies such as simulation, but also values such as autonomy, resilience, etc., will be enhanced using the excellent access that technology provides. And so we can analyze lots variables one side and in the other side. Straight communication with people, speaking about compassionate, straight communication with people you never would be able to talk with outside the virtual world. So we, as faculty, can put in contact our students with people they weren't going to contact in their lives, probably. And in terms of healing earth, in terms of taking care of our common home, to what extent will be able to change the ecological mindset using appropriate blended learning. So we are now avoiding to waste a lot of fuel because we are in video conference. So when we design the correct blended learning environment, we can communicate to our students that some things are better in face-to-face way, but some others can help to take care of our common home. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you so much for the presentation. Well, we have received so many questions from the participants. We have tried to summarize many of them into a few major inquiries. I will read the question and I will appreciate if each of the speaker and Father Garanzini and Father Geister could please give a brief answer about your thoughts on this question. The first question says, and I will read, at the present, with the good news about the vaccines and when it seems to be a light at the end of the pandemic, do you think that the changes brought or intensified by the coronavirus will require Jesuit university leaders to transform their institution, to rethink Jesuit higher education? Please, Father Garanzini, if you can start sharing your thoughts on this question.
I think our panelists have done a great job in telling us about some of the things that I hope continue to develop, all the way from more problem-centered learning, where students are more engaged, to a real reflection on their spiritual health and their well-being and how they're doing. I hope that those things continue, and I think, as several have said, what had already been in progress has just been speeded up. So I think there is. I think one of the biggest challenges was mentioned, I think, by Sylvia, that there's going to be a real challenge to the way our universities are structured. They're structured around disciplines, and the interdisciplinary approach to education, a problem-centered approach to education, this is where our young people really thrive. This is where they really enjoy learning. And I think that really is going to put some pressure on the institutions to rethink how they offer courses and how we structure learning.
Thank you, Father Garanzini. Father Geister, would you like to share your thoughts?
I hope and I'm convinced that there will be kind of a rethinking process after the the pandemic, I have to still think about what Stella said, that I think in the best of all possible worlds, we will keep what we have learned during this period of time, but also return to what was and deepen the insight that we have gained now, and that is the importance of this personal encounter in education. So I think ideally we will draw the right consequences from the experiences, but also kind of return to what is needed in personal encounters.
Thank you, Philip. Father Bosco, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as everyone has said, I think what we've done is we've put more tools in our portfolio for Ignatian pedagogy and teaching. I think we will return, and I think every student who graduates from a Jesuit institution should have that course that is a professor with 5 or 6 people sitting around reading one book with a book in your hand. There should be another class though that is with you and maybe the folks at a university in Brazil doing a class together. There should be another class in which it's just all about writing. So I think the technology is just we shouldn't be subtracting from ways we're thinking about the future. We're just adding another technology to it. So wouldn't the education of the whole person really just be about this additional way, so that we can even maybe assess, are students viable? Are they assessing well on these virtual platforms? But I think we also have to do the formative work of personal encounter with a text, with a problem, so that interdisciplinarity also happens with different kinds of technologies.
Thank you, Mark. Stella, would you please share your thoughts? Especially, we appreciate your opinion because you are watching us from the Inter-American Development Bank.
So my experience says I've learned so much this year. You know, one of the things that I have talked extensively with people inside and outside the bank is how much, even for those who have been in online education, all this experience has been changing. I will say to you, for example, a sentence that I use all the time is that the history of distance education and online education is asynchronous. And this year I suddenly had to say, okay, these Zoom meetings, okay, you can use them, because this was not part of any of the best practices of designing classes. But I think there is here what several are said, there is a place that we meet, right? So I think there is an extra value of being in person. So something that you took for granted of being in person with other people will has a very different value. So we're not going to use those moments to just have a teacher standing in front and talking. So I think if there's something good coming out of this, is maybe rethinking education to be more student-centered and being more focused on the needs of students. The other thing that I think is very, very critical is that many countries and many places have realized how the digital divide is so deep. I heard from many teachers saying, I had no idea that my faculty and my students didn't have access to anything. So I think this is a huge call for a big change in terms of providing the means and making technology something. Well, if you have running water in your house, well, maybe having access in your house is also like having energy coming to your house. So I think these elements I think it's a big call for certain things that need to change, and you can't wait. So I hope that call is not forgotten and placed in second place once again.
Thank you, Stella. Sylvia?
Yes, thank you. Well, I wanted to look forward a bit to the fact that, well, backwards to the fact that higher university institutions in general have not been very efficient in solving the problems that we have today. And I think that is something that has to really question us profoundly. I think Jesuit University, higher education institutions have these problems at the forefront, and they have to move forward to show the world how this is done, both informing the students to be able to face these problems and to contribute to their solutions, and in generating knowledge to be able to solve them better. But I think that our priorities there have to do with, at least from a Latin American outlook, our main problems have to do with our common home, with sustainability. I think we can't avoid looking at that as one of our main objectives. We really have to move forward towards the contribution of universities toward a more sustainable world. Next, inequality and injustice in general. I think this is something that we cannot allow because we are called to work with the poor. So I think that this is something that also we have to look very much into, and we have to discover the ways that we have to use pedagogy and use technology in order to be able to do this better. And third, in our case, in Mexico and in many countries in Latin America, peace building. Community building and peace building, which I think is also something that, due to disappearances and violations of human rights, etc., are at the forefront of what we have to be dealing with. So from a sociological perspective, I think that these are the calls that have to be made, and we have to think in terms of these problems, what do we do internally to be able to face? Thank you.
Thank you, Silvia. Javier?
Well, I think universities has great work to do in terms of structure, in terms of organization, strategy, and all that, to fight with the diversity, to fight with the social injustice. And I think technology can help if we are prepared to share more between institutions. I think this is the opportunity to make networks between universities. So perhaps we can access to other universities, to other problems in South America, in Africa, and so on. We are when we are working in networks.
Thank you, Javier. Actually, there have been so many questions about the role of Jesuit University facing all of these new challenges, especially the social challenges for underdeveloping country and vulnerable groups. And I will try to summarize all of these questions and the call for Jesuit University to do something about the future. One of the questions says, could AAU develop a project or a platform for interdisciplinary courses where international students and faculty can address global topics such as healthcare, digital gap, reconciliation, social justice, sustainable development, and environment, among other topics? I think it's clear the call for the role of Jesuit University to address this topic. So Father Garanzini, if you please can answer that question.
Well, whoever asked those questions is thinking, I think, correctly about the future of Jesuit education. We're preparing for an international summit when the pandemic allows us to do that. The next big assembly, we have a task force looking at the problem of global citizenship. How do we prepare in all of our institutions global citizens as opposed to just simply civic citizens? Secondly, we have a group that's looking at the problem of sustainability and how Jesuit universities can be leaders in sustainable universities. Laudato Si Universities is actually a project that the Vatican has started and has handed to us. We have a group that's looking at migration and how we're going to be dealing with migration and the marginalized and how we're going to reach them. We have a group that's looking at the role of faith and how does the Jesuit University promote a faith that does justice. And we have a group that's looking at reconciliation and peace. Those will be the themes. Those are the strategic directions of what we'd like all Jesuit universities to be involved in a serious way. We'll be presenting all of the results of those various groups of faculty that are working on those issues to the leadership of the Jesuit universities in the next assembly, which is probably going to be a year from this summer.
Thank you, Father. Well, given the time, maybe I'm going to read just one more question that is addressed especially on the issue of online education. And it says, are the AJU and its 6 regional associations planning to develop a project that helps Jesuit University and College to face the old and new challenges of online education that you mentioned on your speeches? Father Garanzini, if you want to.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Each of those task forces will be presenting a webinar during the year 2022. And what we're going to be asking our Jesuit universities to do, our faculty, is to tell us how that issue can be aided by online education and by the new technologies that are available. That'll be one of the questions embedded in each one of those. And the Ignatian pedagogical method is another issue that is promoted by technology and is sometimes hindered by technology. So what are the challenges with each of those areas? If the institution are to become more attuned to those global issues together, then how does the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm help us, and how does technology help us?
Thank you, Father. Anyone else of the panel wants to share their thoughts on this question? Well, we have been working, talking about 1 hour, 1.5 hours. So I think this is enough for today. On behalf of all of the group that are preparing the project on best practice in Jesuit education, and on behalf of the AJU Association and the Kircher Network, I would like to thank all of the panel and the speakers that were with us today, and also all the friends that connected to our webinar today. In Zoom, we have so far, we have more than 300 people connected on Zoom. The conference was also transmitted to YouTube, to the YouTube channel of the AJEU. We're trying to measure how many people are watching us from around the world. It has been a wonderful and a pleasure to listen to you all with your experience and your knowledge on this challenge that Jesuit University is facing today. Really thank you for your participation, and we look forward to continue working on this kind of organizing webinar, global webinar, a regional webinar, where we can share all the experience and reflection on these major topics that are so critical for Jesuit higher education. So please take care of yourself, be safe, and God bless us on this difficult time. Thank you so much.